Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, Mets prospect and former top 15 pick Jett Williams joins us. We talk about his early success at the minor league level and much more. Later on, Joe and I debate hoping for a top 6 pick versus the Mets actually winning games to close out the season. As always, we end the show answering your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This summer, step out of the office and into the iconic with Cadillac, where the Made to Move sales event provides all the inspiration needed to set your email status to away. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac showroom for the Made to Move sales event today. And here's your reminder to subscribe to our show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo, as you see him there. And we are joined by 2022 Mets first-round draft pick and current member of the Brooklyn Cyclones, top prospect Jett Williams. Jett, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
No doubt, man. We are excited to have you on, and we wanted to start with your draft story. Obviously, a big-time pick. We were watching that draft so closely with the Mets having the 2 first-round picks. Did you think the Mets were a team that you could end up with when you went through that process? And what is that day like when the first round starts and you're waiting to hear your name called?
Yeah, I actually did not talk to the Mets that whole year, which is kind of crazy to me still. I went to, I guess the only time I did talk to him was pre-draft workout, which was like right after my season started. But I couldn't participate in the workout just because we were in playoffs. And it's like that was like the only time. So I was like, okay, like they had some interest in there. But leading up to the draft, it was pretty crazy because it was like so many nerves. Like you have no idea who to pick you and like what's going to happen. I think it was probably the most enjoyable process just because it was like you sit there and my agent was like, hey, you're going to go anywhere from 8 to 20. So he's like, hey, like once about pick 10 happened, I was like, okay, like this is when all the nerves kind of started happening.
So last year, as Connor mentioned, it was a rare instance where a team has 2 first-round picks. The Mets also selected Kevin Parada with the other first-round pick. Have you and Kevin developed a relationship since joining the Mets organization? And what's that like?
Yeah, I think we have. So he was my roommate. I guess if you call it my first year down in the FCL when we played for a little bit. He was my roommate too, so just kind of getting to know him. And then once I got called up, I've actually been talking to him a bunch just about how what pitchers' tendencies are, and then since he's a catcher, just like what he thinks of like certain situations of like how hitters would approach things, and so I think we have a pretty strong bond.
We know it's early, but how has the transition to Brooklyn been? This is your first taste of New York baseball.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like the transition is definitely different. I feel like low A is you have a little bit more mistakes happening. It's not so clean, a little bit longer innings. I feel like in high A, there's better competition. Pitchers kind of sequence better. They throw a lot more off speed for strikes, but I feel like for the most part, it's not really too much different. I feel like the biggest jump is it's a lot cleaner baseball, less mistakes, like I said, but for the most part, it's not really too much.
Watching your first home run in Brooklyn, I don't know if you noticed, but the ball almost perfectly timed with the roller coaster going down behind it. And we joked with Kevin Parada because earlier in the year he had, I think it was a game-tying triple and fireworks were going off while the at-bat was happening. But how unique is Coney Island baseball in the early going in your eyes?
It's actually pretty cool. A lot of the players were like, yeah, it's kind of like a little circus out there just because of all the roller coasters and so many lights going on. But I actually think it's pretty cool. It's pretty unique background. Like if you just take some time just to look at it while you're in the dugout or even while you're on defense in between innings, it's pretty just cool just seeing the atmosphere here. A lot of fans, a lot of screaming just because of the roller coasters going down, a lot of lights. So it's pretty awesome to me.
It's been a bit of a running joke for us on this podcast, and in the best possible way, how many walks you draw. I mean, we keep an eye on the minor league system like crazy. We are always watching on Baseball Reference or just obviously on MILB TV as well. Now you can watch the games. Have you always had this elite batter's eye, or is that something as you've gotten older you've developed? Because I mean, the value in baseball has really, really geared towards guys that just get on base. It doesn't matter how you do it. And most importantly, too, the way you use your speed on the base paths.
I mean, I feel like I've always had a pretty good eye at the plate. I feel like for me, it's like if it's not my pitch, I'll just spit on it. Even if they throw 3 pitches that I'm not looking for and perfectly placed, I'm just tip your cap. But for me, it's like, I mean, I go up there. I'm a leadoff guy, so I try to at least get on. If like once I get on, I like to steal just to kind of put pressure on the pitchers, and then maybe have them make a mistake to the guys behind me, and then they get a better pitch to hit just because they're more focused on me. And then, but for the most part, I mean, I feel like if it's not my pitch, I'll just spit on it and wait for my pitch to happen.
Let's go way back. I may have heard a little bit of a story. You can tell me if it's first or second grade, but apparently the teacher said you refused to write your own name down. You wrote Jacoby E. So tell me about that. And obviously Jacoby E being for Jacoby Ellsbury. But tell me about way back then. And was Jacoby Ellsbury your favorite player growing up?
He was my favorite player growing up just when we were, I mean, I guess probably until I could started playing baseball. My first number was 46 like him, which was, everybody was like, why are you number 46? I was like, just, it's my favorite player. Like, I mean, but yeah, I did write Jacoby Ellsbury. I didn't know how to spell Ellsbury when I was little, so I would just put Jacoby E. And my teachers were like, that's not your name. Like, why do you keep putting that name? I was just like, that's my favorite baseball player. I mean, but I would say he was one of my favorite players growing up, and then now it's kind of changed to like Bregman and Mookie, just because now they're the littler guys, and I just like, they're just so fun to watch.
We know there's a lot of season left to go still, and you recently just got to a new level, but how would you assess, you know, your experience and your first real year in pro ball so far, that big adjustment?
I mean, it's definitely a big adjustment. I feel like I've played a lot of games, but the most part is just, like I said, probably in every single interview, just take it day by day. If you start looking at the future ahead, like, dang, like 142 games is a lot, but I mean, I feel like it's gone by so quick. Just if you focus at focus on the present. But for me, it's just as long as I was taking care of my body, just that's probably the most important thing to me. I mean, you could hit every day, you can do things, but if you're not healthy, you're not going to be on the field. So that's what I took pride in. Just coming into this season was staying healthy throughout the whole season, taking care of my body, taking the recovery process, make sure you're just doing the little things to make you stay on the field.
So I write up the Mets system and the prospects for SNY, and scouting reports on all of you. But let's flip the script a little bit here. If you had to take that Brooklyn hat off and put a scouting hat on, what would the scouting report be on Jett Williams?
I feel like each and every day, once I step on the field, I'm trying my hardest, doing everything I can to help my team win. I feel like I'm a really, really good teammate. Just, play the game really hard, play with a little bit of chip on my shoulder. I do the little things, drive balls, hit infield or pop flies, just running them out hard because you just never know what happens. I did have, I think, maybe a couple of times down in low A. There's been people who missed the ball, and I've been on second and third. And I mean, I feel like that just goes a long way and you just never know what happens. That could be, we could be losing by 1 and on the tying run, and we did that. So, just doing the little things right. I feel like that's what I've gotten taught my whole life.
And Jett, it feels like this year, I don't know how much you get to pay attention to the major leagues. I mean, you're a little busy playing your own pro baseball life right now, but it feels like this year, with the new rules, with the bigger bases, and just the type of player in the game right now, getting on base and speed is as important as it's been in a really, really long time. It's not just everyone getting up and hitting a home run. We're seeing Corbin Carroll fly around the bases, Acuna with 1 million steals already. So many guys. Is that something you pay attention to? Because when you get to the big leagues, that's going to be such a valuable skill set in today's game.
Yeah, I mean, I pay attention to that a lot. For me, it's like I know that most likely right now I'm not a power hitter. I feel like home runs will come eventually once I get older. So just right now, just hit the gaps, get doubles and triples. When I do walk or hit singles, try to steal. And like I said before, just trying to, when I steal, just get in scoring position for my teammates behind me. And then, just if I can get on second base and they hit one up the middle, get a base, I can get them an RBI.
Well, Jett, we've enjoyed watching your progress all year, man, and we can't wait to see where it goes, especially when you get up to Citi Field. It's going to be a lot of fun. So best of luck the rest of this year, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank y'all for having me. Appreciate it.
Great talking to Jett, and if you want to see him play along with Ryan Clifford and the other Cyclones on Coney Island, this week Brooklyn hosts the Hudson Valley Renegades, an affiliate of the New York Yankees. Wednesday is Dolls on the Diamond, Barbie Appreciation Day. Thursday is Rock and Roll Appreciation Night. Friday features post-game fireworks. Saturday is Seinfeld Night, and the first 2,500 fans will receive a George Costanza Marine Biologist bobblehead. And on Sunday, the first 1,000 fans will receive a Brooklyn Bridge cap. And post-game, kids run the bases. For more details and tickets, visit brooklyncyclones.com. And a reminder, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. All right, Joe, we get to breathe, talk about the week that was with this Mets team. I know everybody is still grinding along. I know the playoffs are out of sight, but there's still plenty of things to watch for. Let's just kick this off very generic, Joe, surface level or very macro. What is something you saw from the big league club that you actually really, really liked? We'll get into the bad. We're not going to pretend it's all perfect right now. But what was something promising you've seen from the Mets at the major league level?
When you look ahead to 2024, which we will do throughout this show, the core of the offense is based around Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, and Jeff McNeil. And Francisco Lindor just recently joined the 2020 club, and obviously he's been fantastic throughout the second half. Over the last couple of weeks, Jeff McNeil has picked up his game. Pete Alonso has found that power stroke. We were talking about that on last week's show. And, I mean, we have to think back to when Pete got hurt, he had a pretty long timeline to come back, and he came back in like a fraction. So maybe he's just now finally getting healthy with that wrist. So I think it's a good sign that despite losing to Atlanta and other things we'll talk about, that those three offensive players that we think are a part of the core for 2024 are all kind of playing to their abilities now.
I'm with you. There's still very important things with this team. Obviously, the young talent is something we're going to keep an eye on, and we're going to talk much more about that in just a bit. So not to, kind of jump into that yet. You're right. There are so many Pete Alonso conversations to have, and as we always say, this show doesn't go anywhere. We do this show when the Mets are nowhere near close to playing baseball, and we will have those conversations. But right now, what the Mets need is Pete Alonso to be the best version of himself. And it does make you wonder about that injury, the urgency that shocked everybody, how quickly he came back and the struggles after that. And of course, how much that could have impacted the offense as a whole during a stretch run that mattered so much to the team. Lindor has had a great season. I mean, how many times can you have the Francisco Lindor conversation, right? We know what level shortstop he is, but now it feels like there's a balance with Lindor. I think one thing we were really excited, Joe, when the Mets got him, we thought it brought athleticism to a lineup that lacked athleticism. Lindor, a 20 steal season, that is a Mets high for him. He had 10 his first year, 16 last year, 20 this year. We'll see if he can get to 25 or 30. It feels like he's been running very aggressively lately, paired, of course, with the 22 home runs. We'll see if he could top his 26 home runs from last year. The batting average has crept up consistently. Last year, he finished hitting 270. This year, there's been, I think, more power and more speed on the bases. So him getting anywhere near 260, I think would be a really big plus for Lindor. Nimmo's been, very banged up. We know that Marte is going to be a total wild card last year with all of these health issues that he's dealt with. And I think that puts even more pressure on the middle of the lineup guys, as well as the growth of Francisco Alvarez, who's clearly had rookie ups and downs at the plate. It makes it that much more important as the Mets try to figure out, how do we supplement this lineup, right? We know this isn't the guys we're watching play right now, especially 7, 8, and 9, and even Vogelback, who hits fifth a lot. It would, I think, to me, be a complete shock if Daniel Vogelback is on this team next year. This lineup is going to look very, very different next year, and we're in an evaluation process of not only who can contribute, who can be back, and we have the answers to some of those, as we've said, but what balance do they need to add to it for it to be competitive? How about a little glass half empty side? What's something with the Mets that, and this could be a continuing theme with the team, or it could be something new that kind of concerns you right now as the closing run to the season. These next 6 weeks are here.
As much as I am confident that the Mets are going to field a competitive team in 2024, despite kind of some of the public sentiment and things out there. Lord, are they far behind the Atlanta Braves? I mean, that team just came in and they look to be, of course, the Mets don't have their full array of talent and they traded away players, and that's all factor.
But this isn't new, right?
This isn't new. Atlanta is in just a separate class, I think, than anyone else in the NL East, and, in the top of the class of the National League and Major League Baseball as a whole. And that team ain't going anywhere because they just signed their whole team to long-term contracts for below market value. So the Braves aren't going anywhere. And so that means when you're thinking about the 2024 Mets, the idea is compete for a wild card spot and see how it goes. But seeing a team like Atlanta and knowing, one, how good they are, and two, that they aren't going anywhere is obviously a bad thing to see.
It just goes to show you developing within the system and making trades to supplement within that, right? Sure, the Braves have made moves. I mean, they traded for Matt Olson. They traded for Sean Murphy. They have plenty of players that they've brought in from outside the organization. But I think something Steve Cohen has preached since he got here, and a model that we are now seeing the Mets heavily follow, is developing your talent that is cost-effective talent that you can go out and get the big fish to help out those guys. And if there's a glass half full to this glass half empty, right, Joe? It's that the Mets have a lot of promise in their farm system. I'm not saying there's going to be a day where they trot out a lineup that goes Ronald Acuna to Ozzie Albies to Austin Riley and, all of these homegrown guys. But the Mets have a lot of young talent that will help them compete for division titles if properly developed. And you follow these guys in the minor leagues as close as anybody covering the Mets. And it feels like there's been a lot of early returns already from the guys they got at the deadline, as well as the players they've drafted over the years. One of them that was just on the show today is an incredible player to watch with a totally different aspects of his game than what we're used to seeing, with his ability to get on base and completely alter the game with his speed and IQ on the bases, and Jett Williams. So it is I know a lot of people watch the Braves as a fan and probably become very frustrated that the Mets are not in that position and not competing with them like they were last year at this time of year. But I think it's also, as a baseball fan and as a reminder of, how you can turn things around and the sustainable way to do it, right? Then spending money we love that Steve Cohen spends money, right? It's phenomenal to watch. It's exciting as a fan. But there is an aspect of it in terms of depth of the organization that it can only get you so far, right? You go and get top heavy contracts. And what we mean by that is you're spending $43+ million a year on Max Scherzer. You're spending $43 million a year on Justin Verlander. And there was massive expectations for those guys, but it can build a little bit of a house of cards, right? Where if one guy's hurt, well, that guy's a $43 million player on your payroll that you had huge expectations for. Now, how do you supplement that? And or how do you replace that? It's very, very hard. So I'm with you, Joe. It's all right there, right? It feels like it's all right there of how to do it. And I'm not saying it's easy, but at least from what you and I have seen, and I know you've watched a lot of this very closely for years now, the Mets are investing and trying and getting it at the lower levels more so than they ever have in our lifetime.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something that there were times that I had heard the Mets just didn't even scout rookie ball, and that's where teams were able to kind of take advantage of them in some trades. Like you'd see some even lower level trades that weren't significant deals, like getting Jake Marisnick. Like they traded Kennedy Corona, an outfielder, to the Astros, who he hasn't really fulfilled all of his promise, but he's like a borderline top 10 prospect for the Astros now a couple years later, and he was just a rookie ball kid. So the Mets certainly need to do a better job with that, and they have. I mean, you're seeing early returns on the likes of Marco Vargas and Ronald Hernandez, and even Jeremy Rodriguez down in the Dominican Summer League that they got for Tommy Pham. He's only played, I think, 8 games or 9 games, and he has like a 450 batting average and OPS of like 1.3 or 1,003. I don't know. You know what I mean? Really, really good is what
super high.
So yeah, so they've been able to identify players more now. So you are seeing the growth organizationally, and I think the unfortunate part of it is it takes time for all this to come together. I think fans are like, I hear new player development. Next year, I want to see new player development affecting the major league team. And to a degree, I think you will. But it takes a while to make that kind of overhauled approach that they're looking for.
All right, let's take a look at a player that's not with the big league club right now, but we want to watch very closely because he could be back before the season ends. And the Mets are trying to figure out if this player isn't, a very important part of their franchise moving forward. And that has to be Brett Baty, Joe. So obviously, I think, a prospect evaluator like you is probably having a blast watching Brooklyn and Binghamton right now. It's just, you look at the entire lineup, the rotations, there is so much talent there that's just ready to explode, and some of it has. But that doesn't mean we put Syracuse in the corner right now. What have you seen from Baty after you and I laughably, and we'll get into the scoreboard in just a little bit, we're like, everything goes down there, a little bit more conservative approach to the plate, probably won't be swinging for the fences. And what do you know? Brett Baty comes down and hits a couple home runs in his first couple games.
So I think he went down, and I was expecting, like, how comfortable would he look at the plate? He looked like he hadn't missed a beat, really. And, the AAA level competition is obviously a part of that factor. The pitching isn't very good at that level. I think the average OPS in that league is like 7 something. Like that, it's a league that everyone hits. So Brett going down and hitting AAA pitching is not a huge surprise. But it's this very weird dichotomy when it comes to young players like Brett Baty, because if he went down to AAA and didn't hit, everyone would be saying, "Oh, Brett Baty's a bust. They called him up too early. They ruined him. Blah blah blah. He's not going to work out." He goes down and he hits. Now the response is, "Oh, he's a 4A player. He's just not good enough for the major leagues, but he's too good for AAA."
Spot on.
I think the reality is, I think he needed a reset. I'm seeing him elevate the ball, which we've talked about this dating back to probably when he was in AA. When Brett Baty is not right, it's when he's pounding the ball into the ground. He needs to elevate the ball. And so far, in just a few games down in Syracuse, he looks comfortable at the plate. He's elevating the ball. Third base defense looks okay. But I think he's just got to rebuild that confidence on both sides of the ball, because when he was at the big league level towards the end, obviously the offense wasn't working at all. And he almost looked scared when a baseball was coming his way at third base. So I think this is going to be a good confidence boost for him if he could continue to hit, make plays at third base. So that way, when the Mets do inevitably call him back up, which I'd be surprised if Brett Baty were not called back up this year. Maybe it's 2 weeks from now when September call-ups happen or something like that. But I think he's coming back, and I think he will come back with a new level of confidence. And it's going to be important for him to show something in September, because as you head into this offseason, the Mets need to decide, do they need a third baseman, or what do they need to do with Brett Baty? Because it'd be difficult if he came back and hit the same exact way that he did prior to going down and fielded the same way, to be like, we're fully confident in Brett Baty going into 2024.
Right, and I'll say this, Joe, for Baty, and not to make excuses, because on the flip side of it, a guy like Francisco Alvarez seemed to rise above it. Baty was in a less than ideal environment this year. Let's call it what it is, right? And you could believe whatever you want about the Mets. That's not what this conversation is about, right? Like from a clubhouse perspective. What is there and present for us is this is a team that was a veteran team with guys that have made a lot of money and had a lot of accolades. And as they began to underachieve, it felt like a sinking ship very fast, right? Where it started to compile the media, and I'm not blaming the media. The media has a job to do, but the coverage becomes a little bit more intense of this team's not living up to expectations. You have a Steve Cohen press conference, middle of the season, all these things that start to compound. And you have a young player that is not only brought up to play, his first extended look at the major league level, but is now expected to be a contributor to a problem, right? People are looking at Brett Baty and saying, I'm not saying the organization necessarily did this, but by nature, it's what happened for fans and for the organization. Hey, you got to be part of the solution right now because other guys are not getting it done with how many veterans underachieved to start out the season. And the list goes on and on, right? From Jeff McNeil to Mark Canha, who's not here anymore, to Daniel Vogelback, Starling Marte dealing with the injuries and struggles. The offense was missing a lot. And once again, Alvarez is kind of a unicorn because it's amazing how he rose above that and had clutch moments and never seemed phased for a 21-year-old. That's not the norm. For Baty, it felt like one mistake or one bad at-bat or one misplay in the field just kind of spiraled, right? And that's really a tough environment for a first-year player to go through, one that's still developing in the field, one that's been a good hitter his entire life, but is still dealing with big league pitching for the first time from an extended period of time. And I think that maybe getting him back up here in the month of September with the clubhouse that are guys he's played with his entire pro life, right? He's going to see Alvarez again. He's very close friends with him. Ronnie Mauricio is going to be here. Mark Vientos is going to be there. The environment, unfortunately, the stakes aren't as high because they're not playing for a playoff positioning anymore. But maybe that allows him to be a little bit loose at the major league level for the first time. Because let's not forget, Joe, when he got called up last year before he got hurt, he was called up to play the Braves in Atlanta. So I am blaming the Mets a little bit, honestly. I think they've made a tough environment for Brett Baty to develop. I do think plenty is on him, just not rising above it. But I do want to put a fair share of the pie out here and say Brett Baty's development hasn't been the easiest thing I've seen for him personally.
It hasn't. You're right. And the way everyone's different too. Like we often forget these are human beings. These are not AI generated players that are on our TVs that we watch. And Francisco Alvarez, I've said this on this show. I've said it on Twitter. He's the most confident baseball player I've ever spoken to in my life. And that was when he was in Double-A at 19 or something like that. I think he was 19 in Double-A. And he said, I'm ready for the major leagues right now. And I want to win 4 or 5 World Series. Okay. So he's, like you said, a unicorn. And Baty is just simply not the first player to come up and struggle and have that compound on itself. If the Mets were contending, could it have been different where the pressure wouldn't have been quite as great on Baty specifically? Because the reality, like you said, Connor, was everyone else underperforming kind of made it more important that Baty would perform. So just a different development track. And, I'm just hopeful that this trip back to AAA is a confidence booster. And then he could come back, play loose, play with Vientos and Alvarez and, probably Ronnie Mauricio. And of course, AAA teammates, Jonathan Arauz and DJ Stewart. So
you just love saying that name. Arauz had the game of his life. It appeared. All right. Before we get into our scoreboard review and new predictions, let's sneak in kind of an almost would you rather, a question of our own on this show, Joe, that is, let's be real. I mean, you and I are very aware of what's going on Mets Twitter and the pulse of the fans. We have great listeners of this show that we love to interact with. The conversation right now is, can the Mets lose enough games to pick in the top 6 of the draft / lottery where they will not be penalized in the first round, right? What I'm highlighting for those that don't know, and we talk about it almost every show, is if the Mets pick outside the top 6 in the first round, the pick moves back 10 spots because of luxury tax penalties. If they pick in the top 6, that pick doesn't move back until the second round. So they'd hold on to that top 6 pick. Or actually seeing the Mets play better down the stretch and win games. And consider this. A lot of the current pieces, will be needed to be competitive next season. Right? Like I don't want to see Francisco Lindor go in the tank, Pete Alonso go in the tank, Jeff McNeil struggles to continue. And so seeing success, whether it's, when Baty gets back up here, Ronnie gets up here eventually, Alvarez is still here, and then the veterans that are part of the core that you hinted at, Joe, how do you balance that, right? Winning too many games with guys that matter, right? I'm not saying I want to see Ara Ruse and DJ Stewart hit 8 home runs in 12 games and carry the Mets, because I'm sorry, good for those guys, and I'm rooting for their major league careers. Doesn't matter for next year at all. But the actual core compared to the value that a top 6 pick would be in this era.
My gut tells me draft pick, because that's what I do. I do the prospects, I do the draft.
If you said the other thing, I would have called you a liar.
Yeah, that's fair. But when you think about the pick drop, it's not just falling from 7 to 17. The Mets fell from 22 to 32 this year, ended up with Colin Houck, and we're good. But the difference is the bonus pool that comes along with that. If they pick number 6, based on just using this year's numbers as a guide, if they pick number 6 versus number 17, say they drop 10 spots from number 7, that would be a $2.5 million bonus pool difference. That's like the equivalent of adding another first-round player to your class.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So to me, I prefer the idea of the draft pick. But then the other side of me is also a Mets fan. Like, I don't want to see them, like, the core players actually stink for the rest of the year. So I'd like them to play well, the core players at least. And I think the way the starting rotation is set up, I think they're going to manage to lose enough games to at least be in a reasonable enough position where they could end up in the top 6 pending the lottery balls.
I think that's the balance, right? The pitchers that don't have a big hand in the future struggling, and the Mets lose and fall into the top 6, but Mauricio to have moments. Of course, Lindor continued to have a really strong finish. And those guys as well. So it's not the last time we'll talk about that on this show, but it is something that the fans are understandably closely watching. All right, let's review our scoreboard, make new predictions, and of course we will get to the mailbag at the end of the show as we always do. Last week's Joe, we're a little cold streak right now. Let me just say it, okay? The first one, over under push it 2 for Francisco Alvarez home runs in the next 7 games. We both pushed. The result was 0 home runs for Alvarez, no points awarded. Over under push is set at 2 for Pete Alonso home runs in the next 7 games. We both went over, and the result was 2. So this was a push for Pete, no points awarded. Over under push at 7 for Jett Williams walks in the next 6 games. We both went under. This was close, Joe. Jett had 5. Shocking. Jett Williams just continues to walk like crazy. So we each got a point, but that was a real tight one. The last one, over under push, was set at 2 for Brett Baty home runs in those next 6 games. He had 2. It was a push. We both went under. No points awarded. Each got a point for the week out of 4. On the season, we are tied 15-15. So we're back. Those were fun. We're gonna run them back again here, okay? The last 2 that we had. Over under push set at 6. Jett Williams walks in the next 6 Cyclones games. As I always do, Joe, I give you the floor for the first one.
I'm gonna go under because it's the Mets pod push. Remember, we had Kevin Parada on, and then he just started raking right after. Jett Williams now being on the Mets pod, he's going to start hitting. Walks will take a little bit of a back seat. He'll walk 4 times over the next 6 games, but he'll go and hit 350.
All right, I am going to go with the push here. I think Jett gets the 6 walks. I think it's just in his DNA at this point. I am not going to bet against the man, and he gave us a scare last week. All right, the next one, over under push is set at 2 for Brett Baty home runs in the next 6 Syracuse games. I'm going to go over here, Joe. I just think Baty is laughably mastered AAA pitching. I think he's calm and loose up there, and I think that he has a different power stroke like many do at the AAA level. What about you?
I will go push. I think he's going to hit home runs. Unlike last week when we were like, yeah, he's going to work on approach. He's not worried about home runs. So I think he'll hit a couple this week, and I'll push it too.
All right, the next one, Ryan Clifford home runs in the next 6 Cyclones games. Over under push is set at 1 here, Joe.
I'll push. I mean, Ryan Clifford has some real special power. I mean, when the home run he hit the other day in Brooklyn, I haven't seen a left-handed hitter hit a ball there in Brooklyn since Ike Davis, I think. Like, you don't hit balls out to that right center gap with the breeze coming in from the water near the canopies and stuff. That's not where baseballs go from hitters in Brooklyn. So Ryan Clifford, impressive power. I will say he hits 1 home run in the next 6.
I'm going to go with the over. I'm with you that he's got impressive power. I think he gets 2 or 3 in the next 6 games. This dude, when you hear the bat come off the ball, when he barrels it, it is loud. Really, really loud. Clifford, it seems like the Mets were ecstatic to get him back in that Verlander trade. And he is one of the big power bats now in the Mets system. All right, the next one. Over under push, Francisco Lindor stolen bases in the next Mets 7 games. I'm going over here, Joe. I think that's too low. Lindor is running. He seems healthy after a little bit of a scare with the MRI that came back clean. I think Lindor steals 2 to 3 bases this week.
I'll also go over. I think in the back of his head, I think he'd really like to have a shot at 30-30. He may not quite get there, but I think he'd like to have a shot. So you mentioned earlier he's been aggressive. I think that'll continue. So I'll join you in the over.
All right, our last one for the week. Over under push is set at 7 for Jeff McNeil hits in the next 7 Mets games. For some context here, Joe, he is heating up. He's had 9 hits in the last 7 games. What are you going with here?
I will push at 7. I think that's a pretty good number, but it does feel like we're starting to see the Jeff McNeil that we're used to seeing, because this year has just been a weird year all around, and especially weird for Jeff McNeil.
Yeah, this one's tricky because they're dealing with some really bad pitching, right? Against the Pirates, against the Cardinals, even some of the guys, like the Braves have a good rotation, but even some of the back end starters they're having to roll out right now. I'm going to go with I'll go over here. I think Jeff's hot. I think Jeff continues to hit. I wanted to go with the push as well, but it's so hard to land right on the number. So I'll go with the push as well. So that's our scoreboard for the week. We got to figure this thing out. Joe and I are tied 15-15. The season is winding down. It's coming to an end. I love that we got the minor leagues involved. Before we get out of here, Joe, let's do at least one mailbag question. We've had a jam-packed show today, as we always joke around. No matter where the Mets are in the standings, the Mets pod stays busy. Okay, so Joe, this one is specifically for you from John Reyes. Of the players the Mets recently acquired at the deadline, which of the bunch will make their MLB debut first?
So I know everyone wants to hear Luis Angel Acuna.
That's
Drew
what they
Gilbert.
all want.
The answer is probably Justin Jarvis, the right-handed pitcher that they got from Mark Canha.
You just got tomato thrown at you from the crowd, by the way.
He's at the AAA level already. It's been, mixed his first couple starts with the Syracuse Mets, but he has to be added to the 40-man roster this offseason to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. And given the kind of dearth of starting pitching depth that the Mets have in the organization, I would throw my money on Justin Jarvis being first. But I do think Drew Gilbert and Luis Angel Acuna, to throw some tomatoes back, both have ETAs of 2024. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see them at some point in the year. I just would guess you have a better chance of seeing Justin Jarvis as your 8th starter or something like that, based on history. See him a little sooner.
If there's any reason to be even more excited, it feels like they'll come up in a wave, right? Because they're on the same timeline. When you have Gilbert and Acuna maybe come up like we saw with, obviously Baty and Alvarez. And of course the results have been mixed, but I think it brings a lot of excitement, especially for a team that's trying to develop a young core. So I'm with you. It'll take a little patience, but not that much. These guys are not that far away, and they've looked really, really strong in AA so far. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This summer, step out of the office and into the iconic with Cadillac, where the Made to Move sales event provides all the inspiration needed to set your email status to away. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac showroom for the Made to Move sales event today. And of course, remember, subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for sticking with us, everyone. We will catch you next week.